Like so many people these days, we live in the suburbs, and Dave needs the car every day for business.
Welcome to the American Dream, life in the suburbs, where every man's home is his castle, every green lawn his estate, and every neighbor his equal. The modern American highway system has guaranteed every hard-working family man the opportunity to escape the crowded city and discover the freedom of owning his own home, a single-family home. Just look at those kids having fun. A new generation born into the American dream. The luckiest generation in American history. Mom enjoys suburban life too. She employs all the modern conveniences to make a happy home decorated to perfection. When Dad comes home from a hard day's work, dinner is ready. The whole family enjoys a leisurely meal together before retiring to the living room for the main event, television.
Sock it to me.
There's no need to leave this cozy refuge. On the weekends, Mom works in her flower garden and Dad does a few chores around the house. Looks like that picket fence needs a new coat of paint. Our happy family enjoys life in the suburbs away from the dangers of the city. It is a slice of heaven, and they own it.
Or that slice of heaven owns them. Hello, I'm Shane Franklin.
And I'm Shannon Bowers. A growing number of people in America today are looking for a different life, in a place called downtown.
This return to cities, big and small, is happening in attractive places we've all heard about. From Portland, Oregon to Asheville, North Carolina, those vibrant downtowns that attract young and old alike.
But people are also returning to places not so well known. Places with suburban population densities, places struggling to define an urban identity, places such as Springfield, Missouri.
This is Park Central Square, the heart of downtown Springfield. It has been the focal point of life here since the city was incorporated in 1838.
Wild Bill Hickok killed Davis Tutt in a duel here in 1865, the first quick-draw shootout in the Wild West.
In 1906, a mob of 2,000 lynched 3 black men on Park Central Square: Horace Duncan, Fred Coker, and Will Allen, leading to an exodus of the African American community. Today, Springfield remains one of the whitest metropolitan areas in America.
Hearst department store on the square was the center of consumer life for much of the 20th century, bustling with streetcars and pedestrians before the post-war automobile boom.
All of that changed in 1970 with the opening of the Battlefield Mall in the suburbs south of downtown. Businesses closed, people left, and until recently, just the last 15 years, downtown Springfield suffered from neglect. The dream of life in suburbs created a nightmare for America's downtowns.
But something exciting is happening, and unexpected. While it's well known that the millennial generation is less interested in suburban life, our baby boomer parents, the children of the post-war suburbs, have begun following us into downtown, our 2 largest generations looking for a new American dream.
Take a look at the results so far. The old Hearst department store, having sat vacant since the 1990s, is now luxury lofts for empty nesters and young professionals. Within 2 blocks of Park Central Square, 4 more large loft projects have been completed or are under construction in once derelict buildings.
The new downtowners are seeking something different. Rather than walking behind a lawnmower, they would rather walk to the theater and to work. This new dream is downsized and sustainable, but not without its challenges as cities struggle with 21st century problems.
Despite significant demographic changes happening now, the dream of a house in the suburbs is still the most compelling narrative of life in this country. That's not likely to change as long as we have gasoline to burn and inexpensive land to develop, as long as we can afford it.
The American suburbs are the result of post-war economic expansion and government policies designed to encourage home ownership. Inexpensive, mass-produced houses, cheap land, and low-cost loans lured middle and working-class families away from the cities, beginning in the late 1940s.
This exodus devastated downtown America, creating decades of economic and social struggle. And now those same struggles have caught up with suburbia, where crime, poverty, and foreclosures are on the rise.
In 1947, Harry Truman gave the State of the Union address and said, we need to provide homes for the people so they're not ganged up, living multi-generations in one home. He came forward with this whole idea that we needed to build lots of kind of more rural places. And the whole idea that built into was the 1949 Housing Act, which was the first of its kind, which said, we are going to get everyone with the means. Everyone with the means will have the opportunity to move out of the cities to live in nature. And they'll be able to get everywhere conveniently in their automobile. But don't worry, for those without the means, we're going to take care of them. We're going to tear down those tenements, those blocks of what now is called Prospect Park area and the wonderful, very expensive parts of Brooklyn. That was all back in the late 40s. Those were the tenements. And so block after block after block of really solid communities were devastated so that towers could be built for the poor people. And what we didn't seem to understand is that the poor people weren't thankful for being told, we're going to tear down your home and put you in a tower. They didn't look at it as this wonderful experience that's going to make everything better. It destroyed their community, and they were angry. Pruitt-Igoe got was an award-winning project in St. Louis that basically the only final answer for it was to be dynamited. They had and the sad thing is it's a great piece of property, and unless something's happened in the last year or so, I think it's still sitting there ready and willing to be developed.
The American dream mythology, at least it's been recited to us, and we've recited it back since World War II. The components of it are falling apart. And the reason is because we've sort of reached the kind of crisis point where the combination of cheap fuel, cheap land, lax mortgage requirements, the ability for incomes to keep growing just to satisfy the needs for more and more expensive housing. All that stuff has come to an end at exactly the same time the largest generation in history, the boomer generation, is nearing those kind of retirement years, and at exactly the same time the sons and daughters of the boomer generation, the millennials, are launching their lives, their careers and their families and that sort of thing.
Well, the grand experiment, which was building massive interstate highways in far-flung areas and cow fields, and then building subdivisions to support that with some strip commercial along the highways, happened everywhere in this country all at once, and no one really bothered to say, gee, was this a good idea or not? We just kind of did it. And as we can tell, it didn't work. It's not how people live. It's not how humans live. It's not how 90% of the world lives. And basically, we are reverting back to the way cities were built and designed and functioned, before the great experiment, which we call post-World War II, auto-dependent sprawl development.
America is divided between people who want walkable urban and drivable suburban lifestyles, according to a recent Pew Research Center survey.
49% preferred the low-density car-dependent model. 48% preferred the walkable urban model. The demographic groups that value the city most include millennials and older baby boomers, Hispanics, college graduates, and liberals.
Loft living is not for everyone, but there is a certain segment of our society that loves it. And if they love it, they really love it. Didn't think Springfield would have something so cool.
Springfield looks so much better from this area. It's very cool. Yeah. And you can see the coffee, I think, from here, so perfect. I mean, they're going to deliver up here, right? Oh. Good, actually included everything else.
A lot of students love it. It's an alternative to dorm life or sororities and fraternities. They flock to the lofts, and we went from really 0 to 60 in about 2 seconds, because we went from really having virtually no lofts downtown, and all of a sudden, once the first couple of lofts started to be developed and they saw the demand, everybody wanted to create a loft downtown, and so now we have a lot of loft living.
Well, this sort of idea of the new demographic transformation of the United States is really quite fascinating. I think people have been following it for a while, but the actual import of what we're learning is just recently becoming apparent and realized that actually the millennials are going to be a bigger population group than the boomers. So there's more of them than there are boomers. And yeah, wonderful, they want a very similar lifestyle, that walkable lifestyle, smaller scale spaces, not necessarily getting married or getting married later, not necessarily having children. So smaller apartments, empty nest, not really building their lives around children the way that previous generations did. And creating this opportunity for these amazing multi-generationally mixed cities in a way that I don't think we've seen before, in terms of the possibilities that can happen when older people with means, with resources, with knowledge and wisdom and experience meet energetic young people, either fresh out of school or in their 20s and starting their careers with a lot of ideas, very tech savvy, not a lot of resources necessarily, but a lot of energy, and bringing those folks together is going to create magic. It's going to create incredible dynamism in cities.
Robert Stoitville, writing for Better Cities and Towns, listed the top 10 reasons a new American dream is emerging in our cities. Let's take a look.
Number 10. Americans are driving less, especially millennials. Driving has been declining for more than a decade. Automobile miles per capita have declined every year since 2004.
Number 9. Many millennials, members of America's largest generation, want to live in urban places.
Number 8. Walkable places put your feet on the path to success.
Number 7. Productivity and innovation thrive as population density rises. It works this way. The more interesting people you bump into, the more interesting things happen.
Number 6. Fame as well as fortune can be found in urban areas. Here's how Robert Stoitville explains it. Tiger moms, take note. If you want your children to be successful enough to be profiled in Wikipedia, the odds rise substantially if you raise them in a big city or small city anchored by a university. The New York Times came to that conclusion in a geographical analysis of Wikipedia biographies. Ironically, for several generations, parents have moved to distant suburbs to give children a better chance of success. Notes the Times, growing up near ideas is better than growing up near backyards.
Number 5. You are less likely to die in a pool of blood if you're raised in an urban place. Again, quoting Robert Stoitville, parents have long moved to quiet suburbs for safety. A 2013 University of Pennsylvania Children's Hospital of Philadelphia study challenges the entire notion that suburbs are safer. The study examines all kinds of accidental and violent deaths in America. Contrary to conventional wisdom, urban streets are significantly safer than leafy suburbs and rural areas. The number 1 U.S. cause of death from ages 5 to 34 is automobile crashes, according to the Center for Disease Control. Deadly automobile crashes are far less likely on lower-speed urban streets.
Number 4. Bicycles are way cool, and not just for hipsters.
Number 3. McMansions. Yuck.
Number 2. Downtown is the place where the creative class hangs, and not just the hipsters.
And number 1. Which of these scenes makes you feel at home? Do millennials actually prefer urban neighborhoods to suburbs? Well, it's not a simple yes or no question.
Michael Lewin, a law professor who writes for Planetison, notes that knowledgeable sources disagree.
So, Lewin conducted a thought experiment and discovered the answer to the question, do millennials prefer cities or suburbs? The answer is yes.
How can both propositions be true? I'll paraphrase the hypothetical Lewin imagined. Suppose there are 1,750 recent college graduates in any town USA. 250 of them live downtown, 600 of them live in the city outside downtown, and 900 of them live in suburbia. Let us further suppose that any town has in addition 500 downtown residents, 3,000 city residents, and 8,000 suburbanites.
The 250 new graduates who moved downtown have increased downtown's population from 500 to 750. So the headline could be, Millennials cause downtown population to increase by 50%.
And the new graduates have caused the total urban population to increase from 3,500 to 4,350. So another true headline could be, Millennials cause city population to increase by 20%.
But the majority of recent graduates, 900 of the 1,750, live in the suburbs. So yet another true headline is, college graduates mostly move to suburbs. Even if a minority of millennials choose city living, that group can create a considerable increase in urban population.
Another way to put it, when even a small number of America's 2 largest generations do anything, it creates a big impact.
And generally speaking, I think, it has demonstrated that people who live in suburbs, especially the younger generation, are a little bit fed up with that kind of banality of the suburb. The fact that at the suburb, when you're 15, 16, you really can't do anything, you're cut off. The downtown offers that opportunity for excitement. And I think there's generally a transformation taking place in the United States today where a lot of the youth, a lot of younger people, a lot of professionals actually do want to be close to an area that offers a lot of services of different types, certainly a good quality of life, good restaurants, good drinking establishments, or opportunities for theater and opportunities for independent movies and things like that.
they're coming from it from a different standpoint. They all want walkable urbanism. You know, the kids grew up in the suburbs. They don't want to live that lifestyle. The baby boomers now find themselves with empty bedrooms, large homes, something like 150 million empty bedrooms in the U.S. at any given time. You know, these big homes, and they want to be able to maybe enroll in university and take a couple of classes. This is the baby boomers. They want to be in the downtown. They want to walk to their restaurant and walk back to their apartments. You're hearing about a lot of millennials saying, we want quality of life, and if our mortgage is going to be unaffordable, if I was starting my career over again, I would be going to a mid-sized city. I really would be, where I wouldn't have to indebt myself for the next 40 years or 30 years or whatever with a huge, huge, huge mortgage, and go to a mid-sized city that is perfectly pleasant, that is evolving, that's developing, that's exciting, that's easily accessible, and that would be fantastic.
The biggest thing that brought me to Springfield was probably in 2010, my house in Festus, Missouri caught fire. And so I went and lived with a friend, and her mother specifically started egging me on to she's like, well, you should probably apply for colleges and things like that. And so I looked at Kirksville, it's Truman State, but they don't have a CIS degree, and it's Kirksville, Missouri, which isn't really hip and happening. It's kind of like a farm town. And so Missouri State had a CIS degree, and when I visited here, I really liked Springfield a lot. And I like Missouri State's campus, it was really, really nice. But Springfield, I mean, it's the third largest city in Missouri, right? So I knew there would be some stuff to do. It seemed pretty nice. Downtown was cool. Went to Maria's, it was nice. If I went to Columbia, it wasn't like I felt there was a huge city population. There was more, this is a college town, bunch of college kids. We're downtown in Columbia, we're gonna get drunk, we're college kids.
And so we're seeing this phenomenon happen, not just in big cities like Springfield or Minneapolis, or Jacksonville, or Atlanta, or Houston, or LA, because it's happening everywhere, and Pittsburgh, and I could keep going, in Buffalo. It's happening in small communities too. It's happening in rural areas in New Hampshire. It's happening where there are fabulous buildings in downtowns where people want to live, where you don't have to build a new loft, the developer doesn't have to build a new loft, they need to renovate a 200-year-old mill building, which is 90% of New England. But you see this in places like Concord, New Hampshire, where a new mill loft conversion, sold out instantaneously and has a waiting list. And most of the people that want to live in it, are between the ages of like 25 and 35 or 40.
And I was never a yard man. And we had an 1.75 acres of yard and woods. And I would come home from traveling. I traveled a lot in my work, ready to spend some weekend time doing other things, and looming ahead of me was the yard, mowing the yard and taking care of the landscaping and those kinds of things. And it became, frankly, I think a burden, and we both at some point decided we really don't want a yard anymore.
Yeah, and just maintenance of the house. We lived in the same house for 21 years, and things fall apart. And so, we got tired of having to repair the things that were falling apart.
We replaced the furnace, and we replaced, windows.
The worst thing, though, was that our basement flooded, and, it was just stuff like that we had to deal with all the time, constantly.
So we were not good homeowners, I think.
Or yard owners.
Yeah.
It's a half mile away from my job because I work at City Utilities' main office, and it's 0.3 miles away from everything else. So it's very nice, very convenient location. It just really depends on where you go and where you are. I like this location a lot because, say if I were to live somewhere such as the Walnut Quads that are off of Walnut, there's a lot, it's very high traffic, a lot of people all the time, gets very, very loud, whereas living just a street over from like the square, basically, it stays very quiet over here. It's not always super, super active. The atmosphere is nice, especially when you just walk in town. Like I have access to things like First Friday. I can walk down and people are showing their art and selling their art and things like that. And there's always activities and stuff on the square. it's really, really fun.
In Springfield specifically, I mean, it was close to the city that we had lived in for a long time. We lived 30 miles away in Bolivar. And we became interested, I think, when our son was in college and he lived in an apartment downtown and loved it, and we loved visiting with him. And when he went places during the summer, we would sometimes come and stay in his apartment. And we just really liked that, the idea of that kind of a lifestyle.
There were times when we thought about kicking him out for a while just so that we could stay more time. But we really enjoyed that time when he was there and getting to camp out there occasionally. So that was one of the things to me. But I think as much as anything, we also had done quite a bit of traveling. And we liked cities. We liked the times that we had when we could stay there for a couple of weeks or 3 weeks and walk places to eat out and to go to movies or plays or shows, bands. So those things were things that we always enjoyed, and just having an easier access to them was part of what I liked about coming here.
I think another thing, our family was gone. Our children were graduated from high school, and our older kids have been gone for many years. And we had a big house, and part of it was just our footprint. We didn't need to have this house that we were heating. We didn't need to have all this stuff that we had accumulated throughout all the years, and so we just decided to get rid of it.
Well, I mean, the difference between European cities and American cities, basically, is people abandon the central city. And they abandoned our downtowns. And it's only now that we're starting to see a turnaround of our downtown living populations. They're beginning to rise. There is a rise at 2 levels. One is retirees, older people, empty nesters moving into loft apartments and rental units, rental lofts and apartments, downtowns. And then younger people who seem to be moving away from the dominance and the reliance on the automobile. So there is a renaissance of American downtowns. European cities never really had to struggle with that because there's always been people living downtown, always been people living in center city. So there's always a certain vibrancy. So at 5 o'clock at night, up until not very long ago in many American cities, the downtown was dead by 5:30. That's not true in many places anymore. It's mostly because people are living there.
There is something like 30 to 50% that do want to live in that urban lifestyle. So let's just make sure that we're just attending to those folks, because there are so many benefits to that for the whole community. Less driving, there's health benefits, eyes on the street, better for the economy, et cetera, et cetera. All these things have been measured, and we can empirically verify all this stuff. So let the 70% do what they want, but let's just make sure we got it for those groups. We enable and we provide the opportunity for them, and you'll find that it's more like 5% of the living situations in a place like Springfield actually accommodate people who want to live there. So supply is not matching demand, and so therefore you get your gentrification problems as well.
We were so focused on our family, and for so many years we laid aside a lot of things that we might have had personal interest in. We were always interested in the arts and in literature and in music. We were both English majors, and I think that a lot of times when you're in the years when your children are growing up and you're in the middle of your career, you put some things on the side, and Bolivar was a great support community for all of those things, and we have so many great friends from those years. It was also a great place for my company to grow and to become successful. And for all of those reasons, I think it was right. But when the changes occurred, the kids were gone, business was sold, we were in a position where we were going to have a lot more time. It suddenly just was compelling to try something new.
I don't know if a day goes by where we don't say, I love this. I love this.
And
we just look at each
go,
other and it's like,
I can't believe it.
Yeah.
I can't believe it. And I mean, really, I know that sounds a little bit crazy,
it's
but
a little silly.
we were so intensely occupied with taking care of that house and with all of the other things that we did at the time, that it just seems now that we have time for hobbies and passions.
And just sitting right here on this sofa and drinking a cup of coffee in the morning, and it just feels so good. I mean,
It does, yeah. It's wonderful.
So the single-use investment of just designing roads for cars is a real problem. And that was completely subsidized by the federal government, for decades, and probably still is. And transit is under-subsidized. And of course, the cheapest way to get around is using your 2 feet. And that's how cities were designed, for walking. Walking uses no electricity. It doesn't cost anything except a good pair of shoes. It creates no carbon emissions. No one gets rich off of it. It doesn't generate tax revenue, like gasoline does. The next level is biking and transit. And so all of these things are kind of where it's just a big wake-up call in terms of designing cities so that people can get around.
If there is a common denominator in the story of downtown, it is the concept of walkability. Everyone we talked to mentioned it as an important part of developing vibrant downtowns, or attracting visitors and businesses to downtown, or simply as an important perk of living downtown.
But walkability is not a simple concept. While Americans show a preference for walkable neighborhoods no matter where these are located, the fact is we walk less than the citizens of other industrialized countries.
An analysis of hundreds of articles and peer-reviewed studies by Emily Tallon and Julia Kaczynski of Arizona State University finds that compact, walkable neighborhoods have been found to have significant positive effects for urban dwellers in terms of social interaction, health, and safety.
If you live in a walkable community, on average, you're going to weigh 10 pounds less because you do engage. And there's an interesting study recently in Canada in which they studied people who live in walkable places versus very auto-centric places where everyone's driving, and said, well, maybe the reason that people tend to be 10 pounds lighter on average for an male actually, is because those people are just more inclined to walk, and therefore that's why they move to walkable places. But in fact, the study showed that no, they were no more prone to walk, but when they moved to a place that had things to walk to and safe sidewalks and a connected pedestrian infrastructure, that they did walk more.
A 4-part examination of walking in America published in Slate by Tom Vanderbilt explains that walking just 6 miles a week is associated with a lower risk of Alzheimer's. Vanderbilt says walking can help improve your child's academic performance. Walking can make you smarter, reduce depression, lower blood pressure, and raise self-esteem.
Calling a community walkable is the most common term describing the alternative to car-dependent suburbia. The term livable is also used to indicate walkability.
One of the nice parts of living downtown is you probably get to walk from your work or bicycle to wherever you live downtown. And you would be a part of the community. You would see somebody every evening perhaps. You could stop off and have a cup of coffee on the way home. You would be outside, you'd be interacting with the world, whereas suburban lifestyle or ex-urban lifestyle, you get in your automobile and then you're divorced from the wider world. And suddenly you're back, then you arrive in your location and you're in your privatized world, which is very nice, I'm sure, and people enjoy that. And what you have is that intervening time is lost in a sense. And downtown living has the opportunity to provide you with stimulation and meeting new people, making new friendships in that intervening time period. And what a nice thing that can be. Driving's just downtime. Driving is just downtime. And particularly with the millennial population, millennial generation, what they want is they choose lifestyle over a career increasingly. And it's important to them to have connection and feel rooted. And American suburbanization uprooted millions and created a very bountiful suburbs, but it was a price, I think. I think we're rediscovering what we lost.
Former U.S. Transportation Secretary Ray LaHood defined walkability this way: a community where you can take kids to school, go to work, see a doctor, go to the grocery store, have dinner and a movie, and play with your kids in the park, all without getting into a car. So why don't Americans walk more? One big reason is we drive more than anyone else, and we've largely engineered walking out of our suburban environments, making it difficult, inconvenient, and dangerous. The joke is, in America, a pedestrian is someone who has just parked their car.
This desire for walkable neighborhoods is real. A website launched in 2007 called WalkScore allows anyone to plug in an address and be given a number that corresponds to walkability. Many real estate listings now include a WalkScore. Thousands of real estate websites use WalkScore, and you can even search for properties by WalkScore.
If you plug in a downtown Springfield address, 211 South Market Avenue, the Union Biscuit Warehouse Lofts, you get a score of 89 out of 100, or very walkable. This means you can accomplish a lot on foot within a 20-minute walk.
But one important criticism of WalkScore is that its metrics do not take into account the walking environment, the infrastructure. You might live a 5-minute walk from the grocery, but what is that walk really like? Are the sidewalks in good shape? Do you have to cross a major intersection? Downtowns, by their nature, provide a more pleasant walking experience than the car-dependent suburbs.
Vanderbilt explains that all this leads into a larger question, one that haunts the hazy ground between personal preference and societal planning, which is how Americans actually want to live. Do Americans want sidewalks in front of their houses and actual places to walk to? Or are Americans happy to drive to where they can walk?
Surveys on this question are decidedly mixed or inconclusive. Recall the Pew study we mentioned earlier, showing a near even split between Americans who want to live in walkable urban neighborhoods versus suburban neighborhoods. A National Association of Realtors survey found that a majority of people would rather live in a smart growth community than a sprawl community. The same survey found that a majority, however, were willing to accept a longer drive to shops and restaurants if it meant having a single-family home.
What these surveys show is that most Americans would like to live in places that don't really exist.
No matter where Americans want to live, their historical preference for getting there is by automobile. America has a unique relationship with the automobile. It is caught up in our self-identity as a nation of free individuals ever on the move. The automobile is an essential component of our national mythology.
Ask any baby boomer about their 16th birthday, and you'll likely hear a story about one of the most important rites of passage in the 20th century, the day a teenager gets a driver's license.
But millennials appear to be less in love with the automobile than their boomer parents. Americans in general are driving less today, and for many reasons, including a sputtering economy that's squeezing the middle class. Much of the decline among millennials, however, may be due to a change in attitude about driving.
When you talk to my children and their friends, one thing that I'm finding that's very interesting is that there's generally a tendency not to want to drive anymore, or not to drive as much. My daughter is learning how to drive at the moment, and she thinks it's the biggest pain in the world. She doesn't really want to drive. She says, I wish I lived somewhere where I could walk across the street to school. I could then go and do all my other activities, maybe take a bus or whatever. Where she lives now, where she goes to school now, where she does all her other activities, they're all so spread out that until now everybody's been giving her rides. She does not want to be driving herself back and forth and spending all that time in the car. With my stepson who lives in Sweden, he's past 18, he does not have a driver's license, he does not want a driver's license. His mode of transportation is the skateboard. Skateboard and taking the bus. To him, that is the way to go. And if you talk to younger people, that's pretty much, they have a very different kind of attitude, whereas my generation was very much, couldn't wait until we got our hands on the steering wheel. You don't see that anymore. In fact, I think a lot of younger people will be much more satisfied with having the latest edition iPhone as opposed to having the keys to a car, which is an interesting phenomenon. I hadn't thought about it before.
Noreen McDonald, writing in Journal of the American Planning Association, says 10% of millennials driving to Cline is due to changing demographics. Millennials are delaying entry into the workforce, delaying marriage, delaying home ownership. Up to 40% of the decline is due to the general downward shift in the U.S. driving habits. As much as half the decline in millennials' driving habits, however, is due to the change in attitude about driving.
In other words, millennials are making different transportation choices, just as they are making different living choices for walkable urban communities.
For as long as there have been cities, public space has been important to commerce and community building.
Park Central Square in Springfield, Missouri served these purposes for much of the 19th and 20th centuries. It was the center of civic life and commerce.
Largely in response to suburban sprawl drawing businesses and the middle class away from downtown, Springfield had landscape architect Lawrence Halprin design the square to be a pedestrian plaza in the early 1970s.
Park Central Square is listed on the National Register of Historic Places as the work of an important designer. The original design, with its sunken central plaza, encouraged its use for concerts and festivals, rather than as a gathering place for individuals and small groups.
The recent redesign by the local architecture firm of Butler, Rosenberry & Partners attempted to make the space more attractive as a gathering place while remaining true to Halprin's vision. But the urban-suburban separation is still evident.
Until the late 60s, when Springfield, like in most other cities, experienced this flight out to the suburbs. And the remaining downtown folk saw this coming and said, we need to do something major downtown. And that major thing they decided was this redesign of the square, as well as the streets that radiated out from it. And the model in the 1960s was essentially to compete with the suburban shopping districts. You can't fight the suburbs on the suburbs terms. Downtown is unique, and downtown has its own DNA.
I think another piece that you didn't really touch on is this perception of the vagrants, the square vagrants. And this kind of goes back to your mention of people being uncomfortable with people that are different than them.
Right.
You know, so there's one corner of the square that typically has a lot of loiterers who might look unsavory. And you know, I think that's kind of an interesting dynamic too, because you know, you talk about wanting to accept all kinds of people here, and but then there is this group that people do feel might not be the right kind of people we want downtown, and I know that there's a new police substation going down there. Usually you see a police car parked on the square, which is not very inviting. I think there's probably a better solution than that.
We can design urban places to attract people, but that doesn't guarantee interaction or community building. It takes people who are willing to meet across uncomfortable boundaries in those attractive urban places.
Beyond design, how do we develop the trust among diverse people necessary to make an urban place work?
Can wrestle with adventure, just trying to stay alive past anywhere I've ever been before. Because I know
you know, if you have the spirit, that's what counts. It doesn't matter how it comes out, because sometimes people might say, you suck or you're out of tune, but it's the intention. Intention really does count.
And plenty of light and love. Plenty of light, yes, plenty of light, plenty of light and love.
Blind Dave sees all.
I'm a performer. I mean, that's definitely true. Like, whether it's, running my open mic or being in my band or being on stage at Soft Tales, like, I'm a performer. It's what I love the most. It's where I feel most comfortable. We like to go downtown on the square and we perform, but really it's just like a practice for us, But a lot of people, they like that. They'll clap when we're done and stuff, which is cool, because we're just having band practice and people are like, yay, that was good. So that's fun. I have a really low rent here. It's like $100 a month because I just rent this teeny room. I mean, it's Springfield. The rent's not very high. And then as far as other bills go, utilities usually aren't too bad. And then for most of our groceries, we go dumpster dive because grocery stores around town throw out a ridiculous amount of food that's perfectly good. So I don't have very many bills. I don't have insurance, don't have a car, I don't have anything like that. And I don't know, I don't really run into anybody else who looks down on me or anything for what I do. I have had a few people that look down on me a little bit for the fact that I dumpster dive, but I look down on everybody that throws all their shit away, so it doesn't really matter, in my opinion, what you want to say about that. When the college kids move out in this town, we found a freaking working iPhone in a dumpster. Are you kidding me? You want to look down on me for finding an iPhone? Are you serious? How about you think about what you put in your trash can? The fact that somebody else could really use that food, or somebody else could really use that pair of shoes that you think is no good anymore because there's a stain on them. I've figured out how to make it with very little money. I've figured out how to make it with the little bit of time that I have to go to work, and it works for me. And I don't know, I think that with all the other things that I do, someone could see that I'm somewhat of a decent person, that I work hard, that I'm dedicated, and it's, everybody's got something that they do that's not in line with society's expectations, I think. So those are my things, I guess.
You look at something like the square right there in the center, and I think squares are supposed to, in a way, be spaces to allow people to congregate, but we don't go hang out in the square.
Rarely.
No.
I mean, we'll grab a donut and a coffee from time to time.
We have grabbed a
but,
donut, eaten it there.
The public space is underutilized.
Someone like Juniper, she would be in the same city, in the same space, but I don't know how our community path would intersect unless we very purposely did that.
Yeah.
Or she very purposely did that.
You can look at communities in a very descriptive way or in a very prescriptive way, right? I mean, in terms of prescriptive, what my students read in their planning text ways, where it's like, you know, communities should have this amount of green space and this amount of interaction and mixed socioeconomically and diversity and community gardens, and those are all great things, but that's not how everyday most communities in America function, right? If people were out there kind of having their own small sub-communities and they're functioning as communities in a larger whole, when you aggregate those out, they're still communities, right? But they're not the type of communities we think about, we talk about. They're not those idealized, sort of ideologically progressive, forward-moving, prescriptive communities. And so I think that's somewhere that gets lost in between. And it's places where it's not about consuming, about paying. I mean, those are the public spaces where people can interact, but you're right, it still needs that social mediation. It needs people wanting to interact and facilitating opportunities for interaction.
We conducted another experiment that was kind of driven or inspired by some of the research we're seeing in lab settings around social trust. What we did is, at a public event, we pulled people aside and we said, hey, you know, can we get a picture of you? And then the deal was, of course, that we were forcing them to get their picture taken with a complete stranger. And we'd say, you know, meet your stranger, say hello, exchange your names, share something about yourself, and then pose as though you are old friends being reunited for the first time in years. And they really got into it, you know, they were very huggy. This was in New York, which was a surprise to me. That wasn't the experiment. The experiment was, after this brief experience of conviviality, we asked them the standard social trust question, which is, if you dropped your wallet or your purse somewhere out in the city today, or tonight, what are the chances you'd get it back if a stranger found it? And what we found was that people who had, again, a brief moment of intimacy with a stranger were much more likely to trust everyone else in the entire city. So again, what does this tell us? Trust-building encounters cause us to trust people more. They cause us to trust everybody more. So we can build cities that provide more opportunities for these trust-building encounters. It makes people feel better. It also gives people a more accurate sense of the trustworthiness of their fellow citizens. And one more thing, social trust is the foundation of economic growth. So trust is good for us, it's also good for the economy, and we can build for that.
I have this going on, the Drunk Punk Mondays every Monday, and then I have open mic every Thursday. It's really cool because this bar has been like dead before this, so I'm bringing a bunch of attention to it, and nobody's ever heard of it, and I think that's cool because it gives people like an extra reason to come and check it out since they haven't heard of the bar. And there's not like punk culture at all in Springfield, so I thought it'd be cool to get that started up.
But yeah, I think, yeah, Drunk Punk Monday would be an event to go to.
I might let you go check that out first.
It sounds super fun.
Yeah.
So,
I don't know.
put that on the calendar.
I don't like to go out on Monday nights as much anymore because I'm getting old. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's a good question. I mean, creating events like that's a great way to sort of find that intersection, I think, between people. But maybe not. I'm keen on going. I don't think, obviously Vicky isn't, so I don't. Maybe there's maybe an intersection. I don't know.
I could be talked into it.
Yeah.
It could happen.
Vicky and Juniper. Pretty good. A little stressed out.
Oh no, why?
Everybody's running late, and one of my people in my opener dropped out, but you know, whatever. We'll just hang out and have another cigarette. Yeah, my band's playing. We'll play first now since my opener dropped. Jurassic Snatch. Thank you all for being here tonight. We are Jurassic Snatch. This should be
Come back more Mondays. That's we fun. just moved to I like Springfield your band. like a year That was ago. fun. So.
That's cool. I've been here for about 4 years.
4 years, okay.
I love it so much. I'm from I don't know who that is. I'm gonna ignore it. I'm from like this suburbia town in California.
Oh, really?
And everyone's
Okay.
like, why'd you come here from California? I'm like, well, Springfield's fucking awesome.
Yeah.
So, like, really for a small town, there's so much that happens here. I'm glad I was able to give you my magazine.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate it.
Did you get a flyer for our Firecracker show? I'm a motivated person with direction or whatever, and I don't know, it's just really strange for me to try and like look at myself in this different light as a person that like gets stuff done and can gather up a crowd of like 40 people in a hole-in-the-wall bar. It's taking a little while to get used to. I'm eternally grateful for everything that I'm gifted in this town, all the people that I'm around, and all the support that I have. I don't know.
But you know, one of the things you said earlier that there's the unsavory folk on the square. They gather there. And you know, I was in a meeting once and they were talking about, well, the problem is they're gathering there. And I said, yeah, but that's what it was designed to do. It's working. It's just that you don't like the ones who are gathering there. And that doesn't matter to me because it's not fair and it's not right, I think, to say, well, you can't come in. That goes against the nature of a downtown.
When I first moved to Springfield, they were redoing the square, and I was really excited about that because I got to experience it right when it first reopened. And it was the first place in Springfield that I came and got to be introduced to some of the culture here. I think what started it for me was hooping. There would be people down here doing hula hooping and poi dancing and staff dancing. And all of them would congregate here. And I got to come down and learn tricks from people and teach them what I knew. And then as I continued getting into the culture and doing different things, my friend Emily and I, we had our jewelry business and we would come down here and sell jewelry. And I didn't know what to do, where to start knowing people around here. And because of all the different things that happen here and all the different people that congregate, it's how I got introduced to the culture, how I started meeting new people and getting my feet wet. Yeah, it's how I started to fall in love with Springfield, basically.
Many urban thinkers, from Jane Jacobs to Richard Florida, have wondered about what keeps a city alive. Does it require an urban design that favors community building and an active street life?
Or does it require attracting the right kinds of people with the right kind of amenities and the right kind of atmosphere, or something else, or something more? These are important questions given how badly suburbanization affected America's inner cities in the latter half of the 20th century.
Another way to approach this is to ask the question, is your city dying? Let's take a look at 6 observations published by Charlie Jane Anders on the website We Come From the Future.
The size of the population is actually going down. Many American cities lost 50 to 70% of peak population during the latter half of the 20th century, including some of the largest cities such as Detroit, St. Louis, Baltimore, and Cleveland. When cities lose population, they also lose housing, businesses, and jobs. Springfield has been growing steadily through the years, adding roughly 7,000 to 10,000 residents per decade since 1980.
The median income of the resident is going down. This can happen for a number of reasons, including a loss of population with the highest incomes. According to the U.S. Department of Commerce, median household income has been dropping since 1999, from a high of $56,000 to $51,000. The current median individual income is $26,000.
The population is getting older. This trend signals a loss of young families to the suburbs. One of the results is a decline in quality of public schools in the inner city. Springfield's population is young, which should be a good sign. But Springfield's population density, 1,952 residents per square mile, looks far more like a suburb than typical city densities that approach 2,500 residents per square mile.
People aren't paying taxes or mortgages. Loss of ownership, both in terms of housing but also that feeling of belonging, can lead to a number of problems, including an increase in property tax delinquency, mortgage delinquency, and distressed properties, property code violations, and foreclosure.
A signature building is standing vacant for decades. It's a depressing sight reminding residents that their city is going nowhere. It tells potential residents and business owners that the downtown may not be worth the risk. Hers Department Store, the signature building on Park Central Square in Springfield, closed in 1995, but it was recently renovated and reopened in 2015 as loft apartments.
The city is growing, but there are huge dead areas and vacant land. Vacant land downtown, not even a parking lot, signals no economic activity and no interest. Plus, there may be old industrial zones littered with vacant buildings and rusting equipment. Jordan Valley was such a zone in Springfield, the location of industrial sites and a rail yard. The area is now being recovered and developed into a city park.
Baby boomers and millennials are moving back into America's downtowns, looking for the new American dream.
But will they find it? You can't just build loft apartments and expect everything else to fall into place.
In order for cities to take full advantage of all the economic and social benefits of this migration, they must first make their downtowns livable.
Because there's so many of these conflicts, people are coming to this discussion with so many preconceived notions that are generated by whatever tribal influences they have, whether it could be gender, it could be race, it could be ethnicity, it could be age or income. They're coming from all these different perspectives, so there's all this built-in conflict, and that kind of polarization, or that widespread conflicting sets of narratives, are making it very hard to get anything done. But the shortest route to resolving a lot of these kinds of conflicts is to do something on the short term that actually demonstrates what can be done in the long run. That is just to get something done. Find the fastest path to get something done. That very often may be just making a better neighborhood in a town, demonstrating how you get a better neighborhood through planning, through coding, through transportation policy, through some kind of affordable housing policy, but something that can happen in 1 or 2 years as opposed to 5 or 10 or 20 years. So you have to win back the shared narrative by demonstrating small incremental goals in relatively short time frames. The more distrust there is in a community, the shorter those time frames have to be. So you have to build in the proof that you can be trusted to do something.
I would like to have communities just have a goal of, let's see if next year we don't lose any of our walkable, affordable places, and we also gain 2 additional census tracts that are both walkable and affordable. That's our goal, nothing else. Super simple. I would like to see that.
I started growing up in South Carolina, and then I moved to Manhattan, and then I moved back, all before I graduated from high school. So what I found out when I lived in New York was that me and my friends, we're 12, can go down to the diner by ourselves and not get in too much trouble. We were 12, but I think my friends might have mixed some ketchup and salt together because we couldn't afford to have buy real food. But get into pretty harmless hijinks in our neighborhood, or go to the park by ourselves. And when I moved back to South Carolina at 13, I realized that lacking a driver's license, I couldn't do anything by myself or anything with other young people my age. We had to be carted around by our parents. And at the time I didn't think much of it, but later on I learned that that's a result of the way we design our communities, which is a choice and not an inevitable outcome. So if we design our communities differently, then me and my preteen friends could have operated our lives differently. And it turns out that also applies to my mother, who's now getting to the point where she doesn't always feel comfortable driving at night. So she wants to talk about moving into a neighborhood where she can go to a music show or a musical without having to get in a car.
That was called a creative pause, because what came to mind first I probably will not say. I think downtown obviously has progressed a lot, but I still think it's a bit of a challenged urban core. As we know, we had several very substantial landmark buildings that really were standing vacant and actually have now either entered onto contract or began redevelopment, but they still are primarily for kind of a campus student-oriented product. And so I really feel like a healthy downtown in today's environment, you really need some more of the professionals that are out of college and are working and have the disposable income that they want to purchase. And when I say purchase, I mean in terms of retail stores, in terms of the service industry, and probably another level of restaurants than what we would have there. I mean, there's not a drugstore, I don't think, in our downtown, which, convenience stores, we have some stores that sell drug-related or drugstore-related products, but I mean, that would be, I think, kind of an example. Or, we've got some boutique stores, which is actually a very cool thing, but we don't have that more traditional downtown anchors that really successful downtowns at the next level really depend on. I think Springfield has been moving forward, particularly in terms of where it has been, but it still has to appeal to that next level in terms of an age cohort at a greater level than it has. Opportunities like, the hotel, the boutique hotel that's being renovated downtown, and what's going to happen with Here's in terms of apartments that are not totally catered to the college market. Obviously, those are going to help, but I still feel like we've got to have, you probably would call them baby boomers as well as empty nesters, to really secure who kind of year-round residents who are looking for those experiences at the next level that will really help to secure and spur a different kind of housing product as well as retail product in our downtown.
In the process of transforming a city, they really need to be thinking about all those things, not just, hey, we hit upon this real hot product type, let's just build a bunch of those. That was the old way of thinking, throughout the 20th century. And that's one thing that contributed so much to the very narrow band of product type that was sold for most of the 20th century, is builders would say, here's the hot new type, that's all we're going to do. So no, you need to do that and this. It should be both, not either or. If you have, even within each block, a whole variety of unit types, then the ideal is to actually get a mix of people, young and old, that are in close proximity and not have a big monoculture of age either. If it's just college students, and that's kind of like you have a dorm party every night, and if it's old folks, if it's nothing but old folks, then people are tottering around, and that's kind of a boring place. If you mix it up, it's actually more interesting for the older people as well.
Our cities are built the way they are today comes from some intentional policies and some unintended consequences. A lot of the unintended consequences actually have to do with, for instance, traffic engineering manuals that were put together with all great intentions. For instance, they wanted not to overload our streets with too many cars. And the way they went about that was just limiting the number of people who would be allowed to live in a place. Well, it turns out that people don't necessarily mean cars if you're considering that some people will walk and some people will bike. So limiting your ability to live in a place because we want to limit the number of cars is kind of irrational, especially when not everybody wants to own a car and not everybody can own a car. A huge number of people who want to live in urban places don't have that option. There was a study done in Boston and Atlanta that showed generally people in Boston, if they wanted to live in an urban place, had that choice more often than people who lived in Atlanta. And that was basically because there's so much more urbanism, urban type living in Boston than there is in Atlanta. And while not everybody wants that lifestyle, far more people want that lifestyle in Atlanta than can get it. And it's not just a matter of economics, it's really a matter of supply, because those places have been regulated out of existence for the past 50 years or more.
You know, you can't retrofit suburbia. It's really hard to retrofit suburbia. But in a downtown area, you can renovate, you can put on new awnings and banners, you can fix the sidewalks, you can repair the windows, you can repoint the brick. You can fix that. You can make that better. When you've got like a Burger King strip commercial or whatever with a drive-through, there's nothing you can really do other than tear it down and start over again, which is a huge cost. So there's the economic argument, which municipal leaders, local leaders understand in terms of like tax base, in terms of retail sales, property taxes, income taxes, etc., that these dense downtown buildings and properties and blocks generate the wealth there. And some of its potential, some of its actual, far exceeds anything you could build in the suburbs.
If you can make a place walkable, so many things will follow from that. So the walkability factor comes from, well, the first part of it is the physical design component. So how do you make a place walkable? You know, what are the sides of the blocks? How wide should the sidewalks be? Which part of your town should be walkable? Ideally, a large part of it, but sometimes not every street can be walkable. I mean, towns need and cities need streets that are also dedicated to the movement of cars and for the noxious uses and all of that. So it's very important to figure out which parts of your towns you want to make walkable first, or at least build upon where there's already some good material or some good building stock or some good street grids that exist and that sort of stuff. So that's the physical part of it. But walkability also, I mean, there's so many benefits to walkability. There's health benefits, right? So once you make a place walkable, a lot of things ensue. People start walking more, they start to have this, and so then all the dry cleaners and the restaurants and all those sorts of uses start to follow and come in. When you walk more, you're healthier. And then ideally that means that you have other transportation choices. Your streets are better, people are biking, obviously people are walking. That's better for your pocket, it's better for climate change, it's better for all sorts of reasons.
Downtowns can't survive on single passengers and cars because that will eat up downtown. Suddenly you'll have parking lots because lots of times it's cheaper to buy a building, tear it down and put parking in than to build structured parking. Unless there's something artificial that happens like a public subsidy, and that does happen. But there's a surprising amount of parking spaces downtown. They're just not evident, and they're not well marked, and they're not visible.
Then so what could be a change in transportation options that would facilitate that?
I would like to see Springfield try for 1 year mass transit, our bus system. Just make it free. It's heavily subsidized already by utility rates. It's rare in this community, in any community, for the utility company to own a bus system. Maybe it's the only one in the United States. It's one of the few anyway. And the vast portion of its operating funds are funded from utility bills. Electric bills, I think. And so, but it would be interesting to see what would happen if you just said, get on the bus anywhere, go anywhere at no cost. I think that might change things.
As a planner, I have to answer to my client, who's usually a developer, who answers to a bank, who answers to a realtor, who then maybe gets to talk to somebody who actually wants to buy the house. So it can be very difficult to make change happen quickly because you have to knock over all those dominoes. So I think there's a huge opportunity for us in connecting with the general public and helping them understand what they're missing out on by not moving to their downtown or to their small town center, Main Street. And the fact that in a lot of instances, either government or these financial structures are preventing them from having that option or making that option more expensive than it needs to be. We are absolutely going to change the world. Change the world or bust.